At Kristiansand, a British submarine torpedoed the light cruiser Karlsruhe. Further south, another British submarine severely damaged the pocket battleship Lutzow, while the cruiser Königsberg was sunk by bombers from Orkney. In just a few days of savage naval battles around Norway's shores, the German Navy lost, in addition to the 4 cruisers, 9 destroyers and 4 U-boats. Although the Kriegsmarine had been severely mauled in the battle for Norway, the U-boats had used the opportunity to practice new tactics of U-boat cooperation. Just as important, the invasion battles uncovered several major weaknesses in U-boat torpedoes. Magnetic detonators had regularly misfired, and a high proportion of torpedoes had failed to run at the correct depth. Further use of the magnetic heads was banned. After Norway, the U-boats would be better prepared than ever before to wreak havoc with Britain's shipping. For the first few months of the war, Adolf Hitler would not countenance unrestricted naval warfare against the United Kingdom. This was in spite of the knowledge that Great Britain was utterly dependent on trade with the Commonwealth, and that the United States was promising to send American aid to the Allies. Hitler was fearful that if Great Britain was destroyed and her empire irrevocably shattered, then faraway powers like Japan and the United States would be in a much better position to pick up the remnants for themselves. Hitler was also keen to retain the spoils of Poland and Norway without resorting to another expensive war. So he remained optimistic about coming to a peace agreement with Britain's leaders. Hitler had always understood that Germany was historically a continental empire, limited by the size of its navy and the vulnerability of its ports. Since Hitler had taken power, his naval policy had been directed towards the creation of a powerful surface fleet that could rival the British. He craved the imperial grandeur of the traditional fleet, with its battleships and cruisers. However, the performance of Germany's navy in the war so far had disillusioned the Führer. The defeat of the Admiral Graf Spee was especially humiliating, and the naval catastrophe in Norway had marred what was an otherwise successful invasion. Only the spectacular triumphs of the U-boat arm maintained his confidence in the Kriegsmarine. Hitler's enthusiastic support continued to grow, ensuring that the U-boat building program would soon be given the highest priority. As a soldier, Hitler understood little of naval issues. He continually interfered with the army, to the general's unending frustration. But he held the naval hierarchy in high esteem and allowed them an unusually free hand in operational decisions. On the outbreak of war, Winston Churchill had returned to the British Admiralty as First Lord, the very same post he had held in the Great War 25 years earlier. The news of his return was heartily welcomed by the Royal Navy he adored. Churchill was quick to recognize that the war in Europe would be won or lost in the Atlantic, and that the link with the United States was of the utmost importance. His relations with President Roosevelt were excellent, and Churchill hoped that in time the US would join the Allies in the fight against Nazi Germany. Meanwhile, America could help supply Britain's pressing need for war materials. In December 1939, Churchill's reputation had received a significant boost with the defeat of the Graf Spee, and shortly after the fall of Norway, Winston Churchill became Prime Minister. Having warned of the dangers of Nazi Germany for more than a decade, and having vigorously opposed the appeasement of Adolf Hitler, Churchill soon made it clear that Great Britain would never surrender and never negotiate. Franklin Roosevelt had recognized the threat of Germany and Japan long before many of his countrymen. He was a strong supporter of Great Britain, but was restricted in his direct support by America's powerful isolationist lobby. Although formally reconfirming its neutrality just 2 days after Britain had declared war, the United States was quick to provide valuable support. America offered facilities for training British pilots and supplied naval escorts for Allied merchant ships in American waters. In the summer of 1940, Roosevelt announced a multi-million-dollar defense program, the largest peacetime military appropriation in American history. For Britain, the first major benefit came in September, when an initiative taken by Roosevelt resulted in the exchange of 50 American First World War destroyers in return for indefinite leases on British Caribbean bases. The scale of American aid would continue to escalate.
I ask this Congress for authority and for funds sufficient to manufacture additional munitions and war supplies of many kinds to be turned over to those nations which are now in actual war with aggressor nations. Our most useful and immediate role is to act as an arsenal for them as well as for ourselves.
In March 1941, Congress would pass the Lend-Lease Act, one of the most important pieces of legislation of the entire war. The Lend-Lease Act allowed Roosevelt to increase massively US involvement in the war without compromising its valued neutrality. During the course of the Battle of the Atlantic, the Lend-Lease Act would supply Great Britain with 1/4 of all its military equipment. In 1935, the German Navy had presented Hitler with a strategy to build up naval forces equal to those of Great Britain's within 10 years. The result would be a vast fleet of 13 battleships, 33 cruisers, 4 aircraft carriers, and 250 submarines, which, unlike the ships of the British Navy, would all be brand new. When war finally broke out in 1939, the building program had 5 years still to run. The Kriegsmarine was suddenly forced into a rapid construction program. The objective was to build a strike fleet that could blockade Great Britain and prevent American supplies from fueling British resistance.